I tell people all the time, it's fly fishing. It saved my life.
Welcome to the Rivers and Tides podcast, where we have guests on to hear stories of healing and resiliency through outdoor pursuits. Langston Oxendine, thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on.
Before we get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? How long you've been in Charleston for, and then we'll go from there.
My name's Langston Oxendine, of course. I'm 33 years old. I've been in Charleston going on 3 years now. I'm originally from Lumberton, North Carolina, which is about an hour and a half up the road, but I consider myself a transplant. Been here for going on 3. Like I said, moved out here from Colorado after fishing a bit up there and guiding a little bit. I'm just kind of looking for a good start when I turn 30. So it's been a good transition kind of getting over here.
Well, I'm looking for a good start, and I'm past 50, so.
Yeah.
Before we get down that road too far, why don't we start out by telling us where you grew up? Where'd you grow up, and where were you born?
Lumberton, North Carolina. We're right off like the Cape Fear River area. We're the home of the Lumbee Indian. I'm Lumbee Indian myself. So Oxendine is actually a pretty big part of that. If you look that name up in just the Carolinas in general, it has really predominant ties here. We've been here since before we can remember. We're one of the lost colony tribes. So you think about Christopher Columbus, they say we're kind of related to the Cherokee. Then you got the Siouxsie and Lumbee, but that predominantly starts up there near like Lumberton, North Carolina. Real small towns, just sandy area. I mean, it's not a lot going on besides like tobacco and stuff. So really desolate area. We're about 35 minutes from Fort Bragg. Just outskirts kind of area.
Does the tribe have its own land? Does it have a reservation, or is it kind of loosely affiliated?
Loosely affiliated. So technically, we're still on the 50 percentile range of having actually federal recognition. When it gets into like starting a casino or something like that for better health. But yeah, we're kind of in domain of our own area. So we have like, area like Prospect, or there's a place called Greenwood, Lumberton and stuff in general has like different areas and side sets that are just kind of, rich in their own history. So families are from just that. So we consider like that our land.
That's cool.
Yeah. Most of it's owned by most, families around there. So there's no buying into it. Like where my dad and them stay at, we've owned that land for years now. So there's no one that hopefully after someone like myself would be able to go there.
How many, do you know how many members there are?
Enrolled, we have 55,000 last time I was looking
at.
Yeah, we're one of the bigger technical tribes over the East Coast. And like I said, it stretches all the way from the bottom ends of like, Georgia wise in Florida a little bit, but all the way up to Maryland. And we have a vast lot, named like Heather Locklear, for instance. She's an actress. She's Lumbee Indian. And if you look Locklear up in itself, that's probably one of the bigger names in itself too. So
that's cool.
we have a pretty big hold on it when it gets into that. We're not as big as some like you would see the Sioux or something like that out west. But at the same time, we've kind of been integrated a little bit. You got a lot of guys that are light skinned like me and stuff like that, and might not have enrolled or something like that. So that's
cool.
A big factor.
So, did you go to high school in the same area?
I did. I'm a military brat, so I spent time, growing up a little bit everywhere. I was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Like I said, we were near Fort Bragg. We spent time in Germany for a bit. So, but I did luckily get to come back home for my sophomore year until
high school.
Yeah, but I mean, we would come home 4 to 5 times, a year sometimes, just to be able to come home and like spend time with my cousins and stuff like that. So. That luckily for me, I still wasn't like too far away.
How often would you move? Like every 2-3 years, or?
Yeah, I mean minimum. My dad, he ended up getting hurt kind of early in his career, and so he did a lot of like, he worked in Wyoming, for example, at the ROTC program. It was a non-active area, and then he went to the NCO Academy in Grafenveer. So they would try to use him as they can, kind of in that sense. And he ended up spending 25 years in there. So places to place, but a lot of times we got lucky where it'd be like you might go and get stationed for 6 or 7 months, just doing some random little thing, and we just stay at home. But yeah, going somewhere new is definitely something that I got used to it really quick.
Was it difficult moving around that often as a kid?
No, I mean, I got used to it to a certain extent. Fishing was really big with that. I'm a loner as is. I like to go
Introvert?
out. Yeah, I like to go out and fish regardless by myself. I think that's one reason why I cling to trout fishing. It wasn't as like, I need to do so much to get in. So no, I was actually really good. My brothers, on the other hand, they kind of expelled from it, and they would a little bit more in. So it's nothing for me to get somewhere in that sense and meet new people. But I think, like I said, it kind of goes back to now where it's like, oh yeah, I think I'm gonna move to Charleston. And you know what I mean? Like it just, I can't get away from it. And even in my adulthood where it's like, I'm gonna just go and go and go. So
yeah, like, so in my time with the State Department, we moved a lot, like every 2-3 years, and then we've just moved a lot since I've had kids, and my daughter's going to be 20 here at the end of the month, and my son is 16, and I think it was hard for them to move so much. It's always hard to make new friends, but at the same time, I think you do, in the long term, you learn some social skills, like you said. It's pretty easy. You learn how to make friends pretty quick, and
yep.
I know my wife gives me a hard time because every time I move somewhere, and fishing's a big part of this, I always make friends pretty quick. We've only been here a year, and I've made already, starting to make a pretty good group of friends. But I think that mutual community of fishing is definitely, or finding something like that definitely helps out.
Definitely, especially for myself. Like it's been a big factor in just kind of how I operate. Just for getting out the house. I don't do good by myself in the house. I've learned that. So I much rather do more out here in that sense. I might not do the best out here. I still get in stuff, but I still think it's productive in that sense. And you find people that are very like-minded in that. So that's one reason why I think it just kind of it's a good foundation.
How was high school for you? Were you a good student?
No, not at all. I was very bad.
That's all right. Neither was I.
I did not do anything by the book. I rebelled a lot, being a military child. For a while, like I said, my dad was in Fort Sill. He was there as a drill sergeant. So I used that as a thing where it was just, I had a strict in. But at the same time, I always seemed fit. It was like, I'm going to do kind of things my way. I hate to say that but I learned my lesson. But it is definitely not the best time. I did more of doing everything outside of school than actually focusing in school. I really wish I did better.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight, right? Hindsight's always easier to. But I also, I've had a good life and a good career, so I can't complain. It's. Did you ever feel pressure from your dad or pressure to go into the military at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I'd have been the fourth generation to have went in. So that, even in the retrospect to now, it's kind of hard to look at because it's like, man, I kind of just wanted to sign it off for a few years, just say I did it. But yeah, no, it was big. I mean, I took mass fab at 16. I'll practice one at one time. I'll never forget that because I got in trouble and he was just like, no, because he joined active at 17. So it was like coming from our area to go to Fort Bragg and sign up once you were getting ready to get out of high school. I mean, you had a car and, you were secure for a bit. And that's like a big part of, especially with our people out there. It's like, do what you can. But no, he was always on me about doing it. And I hate to say it, I think it's another reason why I did not do it. And I know that's why my older brother didn't. So it just is one of those points where you kind of look back at like,
Yeah. I mean, my dad was in the Marines also, but he didn't talk about it. Well, he did talk about it. He was very proud of the fact that he was a Marine, but he never ever like tried to convince me to go into the Marines or anything like that. But in fact, I don't think he thought I could make it. So
that's
somehow I did.
I think my dad thought I could make it just enough to where they could like keep me in line. That's kind of what he was like, as long as you get thrown in the brig, if you got in trouble or something like that. And he's always dealt with insubordinates in that sense. So I thought, even like going to military school, there was a time when I would stay in Grafenwehr, Germany, and we were going to Bilsec, and it's about a 25-minute ride. And I spent, September 11th overseas at that time. So we were stationed in Germany during that time. So even that, where it was like going in there and you come back home, every day that's all you're seeing. I think it could go positive or negative. One of my good friends, his name's Bear. He literally went out to do the complete opposite. He's like Chase West Point. He's like, I'm going to be, all American in that
He
sense.
was all in.
Exactly. And we kind of grew up in the same mind state, but when he got on it, he got on it. I think it's kind of the same. I probably would have done it if I would have got in there. I probably would have been a 10-year at least, just because like I need that. Just a lot like I did with fishing. Once I dove in it, I just like, that's what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. So it's a security blanket, you know, to a certain extent. And like we talked about community, I think there's the service has like a great way of putting the brotherhood is probably by far the most important thing when it gets into that. And I think, looking at it, it's like,
yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about, for the veterans that we've had on, and speaking for myself, and I'll speak for Austin behind the camera because we don't have a setup where he can speak for himself yet while we're doing these podcasts. But, getting out, one of the hard things is leaving that community, that camaraderie and that brotherhood.
Yeah.
And you kind of get out and, you're pretty lost. Like,
oh, I know. And I say that from like, getting to see it firsthand, and kind of what that does, even when it comes into hobbies, because you didn't have time to be able to like grasp that at an early age. And then you start feeling like, well, I didn't golf, or didn't do this, or didn't do that. And going up by Fort Bragg, it smells like ex-service members around there. And so like, even the identity of seeing it, it's like, it's a far few in between.
The whole town, like for those that haven't spent time at a military town, the whole town is built around the military. I mean,
it's and everybody, still calling everything's PX and this is that and the third. So,
which I don't know how Army bases are, but Marine Corps bases, it's basically it's changed a little. But I mean, there was a lot of tattoo parlors and strip joints,
Fort Bragg,
topless bars.
Yeah, that's by far one of the bigger attractions for soldiers and barracks and stuff. And I think that was another thing too, by just growing up, seeing that on a daily basis, and like kind of seeing, like I said, some of my friends joined before me and seeing what they were doing. I was already in a rebellious stage in my mind where I was like, nah, I'm not, you're not going to do this to me. And like, growing up and knowing that like, hey, in a few years, we're probably going to go here. We're going to go here. I think controlling my destiny was a huge factor of that.
Controlling your own destiny.
Exactly. Yeah. Where you didn't want to leave Wyoming. All right. You can stay there.
It's a beautiful place.
It's beautiful. And so like, if you're in your service in that sense, it's like you grow just enough. Sometimes you might get lucky and get a second in. But most of the time by the time you love it, it seems like you're going to leave it.
Yeah.
Which is good and bad. Don't get me wrong, because you can see the world. And I think that's by far one of the bigger benefits I can say, especially from like seeing Europe and stuff like that. And like, that translates back to fishing. I've always fished in between that. So we would go to a new base or something and I didn't know nobody. The first thing that I did know was like, all right, I can go out here and go find a pond. That's really helped me when we were in Wyoming with just like wanting to go and fish west and go for trout.
Yeah.
It was a very easy transition.
And I think like, living overseas and living around other cultures and seeing how other cultures live. And I mean, that alone broadens your horizons and perspective. And,
by far, small-minded, attitudes that you might have like in the South. And I'm going to be one to say it. Like I grew up in an area where the demographic is very tight. So like even I talk to my grandpa and stuff like that on the phone, or, it gets in, and just culture is huge. So that was one reason why, like, versus going home and staying with my dad, or like my mom's in Myrtle Beach now. So like they split up, but like even going over there, it's even a little too much for me. So I like to have, a little options here and there when it comes into that. And Charleston is a very, very good fine between, especially like I remember going here on vacation as a kid. I've got family that stays up here, so we'd go and stay with them, and it'd be like it's diverse in that
it's
sense,
a good city. It's a good sized city. It's not too big, but it's big enough, and it's got cool history, and it's got
food, culture,
good food, good culture. So yeah, it's a cool place. And like you were saying, where you grew up, pretty tight knit. That's where I grew up on Long Island. That's how it is. A lot of us were, second, third, fourth generation.
From that area,
guys from the town we grew up in, or girls, and it's kind of funny because even today I could go back and there's some people still doing the same old thing, and I would go back in the Marines on leave and be like, or later in life and be like, hey guys, you don't need a passport to leave Long Island. You can like go adventure out a little bit.
Oh yeah, and I mean a lot of my family is the same way, and like especially cousins and stuff. cousins I grew up with. It was hard for even when we were leaving Bragg, because we had spent a good amount of time there, to leave them. And even that was like, it was good getting out. You guys maybe should try the same thing. And I love them to death, but, at the same time, it's just like you get comfortable to a certain extent, and you can't blame them, especially when you're not able to be able to leave and go. I think, like I said, it's a very good trait to have. You don't, at the same time, it's like I don't need necessarily survive on one thing, especially if you're a fisherman.
Yeah.
You get tired of something, you're like, all right, I'm just gonna go switch up everything.
So did you start either fishing? Well, obviously you were fishing, you were talking about it, but did you start fly fishing back that far back, or in high school? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I've always dibbed and dabbled with it, because we would go and do it when we were in the mountains and stuff on vacation and stuff, like going into Asheville and stuff. But predominantly, I spin fished kind of in the end, but I was kind of back and forth between the two. I never really got serious with fly fishing until I was like 18 or 19 years old, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna full time. This is all I'm gonna do.
So was that after high school? Is that when you decided, like, I want to full time fly fish?
Yeah. And I thank God my mom and them are as cool as they are, because I told myself, like, I'm gonna go out west, and that's kind of what the main objective was going to be. And it ended up working. You spend a lot of time sleeping in the back of cars and stuff like that. And I went through some stuff at home to make that easier, between like getting in trouble and stuff like that. And I'd kind of put myself in, I wouldn't say like law wise where I couldn't do anything, but I got in trouble with the law for some stupid stuff. And it kind of was like an eye-opening thing where I was like, all right, man.
What kind of stupid stuff?
Possession of stolen goods for like a 4-wheeler and a few other things. It just, I don't know what
shit happens.
Yeah, man, I don't know what was into me back in the day when it came into that. And I look at it like it was just mischievous and just wanted to get into things. It did not take much for me to go smash a mailbox out. So you could call me and I'd be that guy, like, let's go do it. It's stupid. But anyways, I had a really good friend also had passed away around that time. And then I just told myself, I was like, all right, I just need to go clear my head, and I'd just like to go and be. And like I said, my mom was a really good influence in that, and seeing like, all right, he just wants to go kind of. And I'd spent enough time in the outdoors where I knew she would, when I told her, I was like, I don't want to go. I have to sleep in my truck outside of this place waiting on them to give me a job, I guess, or I'm going to go put it out on the limb. And yeah, even starting out with some of the guide services I did, it was just, earn your keep kind of thing. So I showed up at the doorstep and was like, all right, I'm here, and I sold myself to it, and it was easy.
Where did you go? Where'd you go? End up landing out west?
I predominantly spent the most time outside of Denver. I would be in the Roaring Fork Valley and in the South Platte. I spent time in Colorado, in Wyoming, on like the North Platte. And so
pretty beautiful places.
It is. And, growing up out west a little bit, I'd spent 3 years in Laramie, and so we had got to see the Wind River Range, and I got to spend
also
time.
An incredible place.
Yeah, good to go fishing.
Wyoming's underrated, man.
It is. And if you get the fish like the Christos or some of the high alpine lakes and stuff, or just getting to go see that, and that's kind of where you'd get to go and catch a small little brook trout. And that was, those times that I did go fly fish, I was like where it was at. So I knew that option was there, and I knew kind of I got a foundation of what to expect. But and at the time too, I graduated in 2009. So at the time, like the films were getting really big. And so I was kind of diving into the Fly Fishing Film Festival thing, cool. And just watching all that. So I'd seen all the trout bum stuff going on. I'm like, oh yeah, there we go.
Like, that's me. I am that guy.
Yeah. And instead of like telling
I'm the epitome of that term.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was like, you don't worry about, we had a GI Bill, so I didn't have to worry about paying for college, but like, it was one of those things where it was just like, just don't worry about it to a certain extent. I'll figure it out when I figure it out. But yeah, it was good in that.
Yeah, so when I got out of the Marines, a friend of mine lived out in Boulder, and I had never spent time out west, and he asked me to come visit him, and I was supposed to go and visit him for 2 weeks in Boulder, and I ended up staying for almost 2 years. So I ended up going to CU for a little while, but that's where I learned how to fly fish. I worked at a outdoor shop that was owned. It was on Pearl Street. I don't know if you've been to Boulder.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it was a shop on Pearl Street, and We sold fly rods, and a buddy of mine that worked there was an avid fly fisherman, a great fly fisherman. His name's Jamie Wickersham. He's still living out in Colorado. He taught me. He's the one that got me into it. I think the first place we went was a stream right outside of Rocky Mountain National Park, and
it's probably South Boulder Creek. I mean, you got like Moraine Park that's up in there in the park. When
I'll have to ask him and hit him up. We're still connected on Facebook and go back and forth sometimes. But I just remember the first day I'm standing out there like, holy shit, this is incredible. I didn't know anything about fly fishing, but it was just being out and was amazing.
Yep.
But it's definitely changed. It's gotten a lot busier. So how long did you guide out in Colorado for?
Almost 10 years. So I moved out there when I was right at 19. I actually got a full-time job when I was 20. So right at 9, almost 10 years. And I got lucky because I bounced around to a few different places, and just having, connections where you could set up one way and like, hey, I need you down here for a day. So I would just drive and roll. Luckily for my wife, was a girlfriend at the time, was super supportive of that. So I would not have made it like that, but I got lucky and I made it, almost 10 years. And I got right into the peaks of COVID, and I told myself, I was like, all right, because the rivers had shut down for a point at that. They were like, it was a non-essential business, whatever. And
shut down a river. I mean, what sense?
Yeah. They didn't want you going in the bathrooms. And so they didn't even want us to have point of contact between the 5-foot minimum. And then like one day during all of it, like that, it was just like April of that time, and everything kind of went crazy around March. Around April of that, I was sitting on my butt, and I didn't know like how I was going to make money. I was like, really hurt. And yeah, during that month, they labeled it as an essential business, and it was Parks and Rec, being able to get out of the house. And 5 feet away, I'd stand here, get my clients a bobber, throw a fly on there, give it back to them. We ran that, and then it actually was the best year of guiding I ever had. I ended up running from the point of April into November. I did over like 180 trips.
People wanted to get out.
It was crazy. And we had like Texas open the floodgates up there, and like where I was at, we were running pickups, but Uber was still kind of running at the time. It was a little under the fringe there, and they had like private ride sharing, so people would like get off the plane, show up. It was nuts, man. And then after that, I had a good little bit of money. I was like, all right, if I'm gonna make this change, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it now. And I didn't really want to necessarily jump into guiding as like a full-time gig when I kind of transferred over here. I knew what I knew as a kid.
You're talking about when being a guide here in Charleston?
Yeah, I didn't want it to be something where I'd like showed up and was like, oh, that's what I'm going to do kind of thing. So I kind of tried to veer away from even.
So what made you what was the impetus behind that decision to make the jump from Colorado to Charleston?
Well, I mean, a lot was family. One of the bigger influences in fishing for me, he had passed away. So, and to me, it was kind of like I'd left because somebody had did it and it was a friend. And then like I'd spent so much time out west away from stuff like that. And then after he passed away, I felt really bad for my mom. And I was like, man, I just need to get back home. And so I needed to make it work. Luckily, I found a job here with the skiff shop because I needed a skiff. I am, do not have money as a fishing guide. So it was like getting into a skiff and like buying that, that was a really just a bigger thing, and I'm faith driven by all means, but I knew there was something that was like, all right, shit, this is actually going to work out if you did pursue it. And then I got a chance on a house there in Mount Pleasant. I was like, okay, I can't,
things lined up.
Yeah. And so like I ran at it, and that's kind of where I took myself. I was like, all right, let's get a little bit more sustainable. And something that was just kind of steady in that end. But yeah, I didn't know, and then, out west, like you don't know if we're going to have a dry year in the winter, and they run lower CFS. And, I was guiding on South Platte, so it'd be 150 CFS one morning, and we're throwing eggs and just having a grand old time. And then I wake up the next morning, I'm getting friend requests, not friend requests, but like alerts from friends or people I didn't even know. It's like, hey man, they dropped the CFS down. Are we? So just
and it's getting, out west, you're starting to see, obviously, especially on the Colorado.
Oh man,
terrible drought, and
it's bad.
Not just bad. It's drought combined with more people and more pressure on the rivers.
They're loving it. I don't know if it's the recent trend in like country music and stuff like that, and everybody just wanted to run through the hill.
Man.
Yellowstone. Yeah, Yellowstone. People kind of wanted to get a straw hat and go walk the river. But coming from like a guiding perspective of it, and especially doing it, I like to say I was in there before it really got nutty. I'd say I was a part of that crowd when we were talking about streamer fishermen.
Yeah.
I was a part of that crowd that was probably bringing a lot of that to light, during that time. And like a lot of the people that I met, even back in the day, that's kind of how, obviously it was just, we're a grunge little group. But yeah, it got to a point where, you dump in all at the same put in and I'm taking out at the same takeout. It's like, there's 50 boats in front of me, and I got this guy who's never caught a fish on fly.
Yeah, I call it bumper boats.
Yeah, and
it's combat fishing.
Yeah, and then you take in like how pressured trout fishing is to our overall standpoint. We love them to death, but if you catch one in October and he's brown, then he's probably spawning. So if you catch one in April and he's huge and it's a rainbow, it's probably spawning. And you don't want to.
Did the laws in Colorado, did they shut down to keep people off the reds?
Nope. No. Full year. So, and for me, I was a big, carp guy, and a lot of my friends that I got, I'd moved out west, and then I fell in love with carp. And so it translates to red fishing, but like that's kind of where I did because of that reason alone. It's like, I don't like naming fish. And I got to a point where you'd go fish behind a big rock, and I'd seen this fish that I seen a few weeks ago. And, in trout, it's not like the salt where they're residents.
Guides out west are funny because they'll be like, throw your fly there, you'll catch a fish.
Yep.
It's like, all right.
And that to me for sustainability was like, all right, I want to have kids one day or do this one day. Do I foresee myself being able to live off that? And then like I said, COVID was a big strike of it because you've seen how quick it was like, you're just a guide. Like, what do you, this is a part-time job kind of thing for most people. And then you bring it into the saltwater equation. Like this is
had you fly fished saltwater before coming?
Oh yeah. And that was where I was blessed in kind of knowing where I'd been. And, for me, I've been able to catch redfish in every state that we offer them. Cool. And so like going for the lagoon down in Florida, I used to go to Louisiana quite regularly. I've done walk wading down in like Rockport area.
So you had a
background. Oh yeah. I was very, very versed in it in that sense to where it was like, I kind of knew where I wanted to go. And I had kind of got to choose that before that. And that's one reason why I landed on Charleston. And I'm a redfish nut, like tarpon and stuff are cool in my eyes, but they kind of remind me of trout because everybody wants to go get them. Like I said, I gravitated towards carp out of a trout.
Not a lot
fishery.
of people around here know how to get them though.
Yeah,
and hopefully it stays that way now, but it won't.
And so yeah, that even in that sense, I was lucky to have had it, and even the people that I've met over the years, a lot of guys would go out west during the summertime and come out here during the wintertime, or Louisiana, Florida. And then
I know in Florida, actually, I've talked to a couple of, guys that live in Florida who are big guides down there.
Yeah.
They bitch about that.
Well, no, that's
guys that come in from the west and
quickest way not to make friends. And out west is the same way. I mean, if I got to go out there in the wintertime and grind it out, then like I think you should too. And like Florida's the same thing. It's 120 degrees after tarpon season. So if you're not dealing that with those guys, and after tarpon season dies down, it's usually just like Bob and Sue shut up to go on a trip. It's not, you know what I mean? It's all the glitz and glam. So I think, when you're going to guide and actually call yourself a steward of an area and really you need to be 110% indulged. I would completely agree with that. And
well, at least you had some, we've talked about how, like me, I had never saltwater fly fished in saltwater before coming here about just over a year ago. So it's a completely different game. I mean, which is also what is alluring to me because I like learning new things. So like the challenge of learning all of this all over again, I like that. Like I like that challenge. I like learning. I enjoy learning the logistics, tying different flies.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, it's a lot nicer not tying a size 22
man.
dry fly and tying a nice saltwater fly instead.
5 or 6 bugs.
Although they're a little harder for different reasons, but
they last longer down here. In my opinion, everybody's like, "Oh,
way
man.
longer."
Like you haven't hooked boulders before, but no, the translation, getting over here to that was easier because I had connections and friends, and you guys met him, Connor. Guys like that I could kind of rely on. Yeah, help me get in, and
I think what you guys have going on with cast and drafts is big as far as helping people like me or someone else who's just moving here to help overcome the barriers to trying to get started in a fishery like this, so why don't you talk a little bit about casting drafts? Because I think it's huge. I think it's an awesome,
it's kind of,
you guys are going.
Yeah, no, way I like to say it is it's kind of like the Trout Unlimited for Charleston or a saltwater area, but it's a little bit more, widespread. And just as you said, we have issues when you move into a new area and just like trying to figure out where to go, figure out what to do. Hey, what tides to do this? Like, this doesn't happen all the time. And you don't know that from a context versus like being out west and showing up to the river. So when I started it, or when we started it, that was a big influence. And I was blessed to have taken the trials and tribulations that I kind of had went through or knew that there would be, because you don't just show up to a fly shop and be like, hey man, tell me your best walkway flat.
Yeah.
And it's not like that. And so that the community and being able to like bring other guys in that might not be as receptive as like, something online or maybe like the fly shop, just like my.
We can break the barrier down. There's a lot of guys and a lot of people locally who just they're pretty closed about it, and they can be downright hostile about new people trying to get into this fishery, and
it's something that as speaking to someone from like that's actually a native of the Carolinas, I kind of take back to that. It's seen as like I want to be a real steward to it, and you want to take care of it. And ultimately, the only way to take care of that is by showing people the proper way of doing things.
Yeah.
And even activities like what we're doing now, if we don't show someone like, hey, man, like oil leaks or what not to do in that sense, like a good knowledge and somebody gets hurt doing it, we take it away from us.
I think a good example of that I think I've seen, and not guides here, but in general, I think out west, for so long, it's just ingrained in the fly fishing culture out west of catch and release and being really sensitive to how you handle fish.
Yep.
And I think maybe that's another thing you guys could cover at Cast and Drafts. But like it's just very different, here and breaking down the barriers and making it more approachable for someone like new to it like me is awesome.
And fly fishing is difficult in itself. And the way I tell people all the time, it's like, if you're willing to, be that angst about a spin fisherman, obviously, it's like this guy on a good day might not catch a fish with a fly rod. So you at least should be a little bit more receptive in that community because we're really doing it the hardest way that you can.
Yeah.
And it more or less builds back to what we want. And when we first did the event, that was something that I noticed that was pretty big. We only had like 40 followers on Instagram, and then we had over 50 people show up. And I looked at that and I was like, man, y'all, I think we really, do have something. And then we realized like, not only do we have like it's not struggling. We have a very good community here, but we didn't add kind of like a small knit of just a lapse. There was not a good place for vendors to show up as well. Exactly. And it's like a boys club kind of thing. And we did not want that to be a case, especially when it gets into learning how to cast a fly rod. That's kind of where it starts at. And, a lot of guys...
Especially when you're coming from out west, because
it'll ruin you.
Yeah, you come here thinking, I know how to cast a fly rod. You don't know how to cast a fly rod. Not in the saltwater.
Yep, no. And salted was, especially in Charleston, we don't take into account that we have a low-hanging grass behind us. So even your plane of casting with grass behind your head is an unwritten rule that most don't even take into account. When you get past the grass behind you, if you're in a flood tide situation, you're probably laying it to a bucket. And like, it might be wind on you. Like there's a lot of variables that go into it. And like I said, I've been blessed to fish the lagoon. I've been blessed to fish down in Venice, Hopedale, and anywhere you would consider a technical red fishing spot, up into Wilmington, like kind of the areas that I'm from. And I would by far say that Charleston has one of the most elite, if not the most elite, and not just only from pressure situations, but like the fish is in 6 inches of water sometimes. So like if you're fishing a size 4 and it's got, a heavy lead eye on that base or you use too much resin, expect a plop. Or if you are fishing a bead chain and he can hear the silhouette of the beads dropping, like, dude, he's out. So there's a very, very big end, and they're like, oh, it's just redfish. Like, nah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. These fish will, you'll see them with their backs out of the water.
And to me, and like, which is bad, a lot of, everybody doesn't want to share information, but to me, it's like, it's already hard enough.
Well, I mean, I think where the issue comes in is, I think immediately, locals or traditionally guides will immediately, their attitude is, well, they just want spots, and I'm not giving up spots. And, for someone like me, it's like, I don't want spots, but I do want to be, I want the education. I want to learn how do I find these fish, or how do I fish in this with the tide swing? Where do I find them? And like that's so I can then go out being with that information and then try to find them myself.
I'm big on just like realizing that we've got a very special thing, and the stuff that we're allowed to do, you know, as like what powers that may be. Like say, yeah, you can go pole your boat through the grass and you can go run and do whatever said thing you want to do. But I think one of the more influential parts of that is like safety. And it even gets back to these. And I think that's one where skiffs are a very underrated aspect of like what you might need to do for where you're at. And guys kind of get it mixed up between like, hey, yeah, I can do this with this boat and do anything. Doesn't, you know what I mean? You don't know that at the dealer's lot because they're trying to sell it to you. And then that's just one hurdle in most cases.
I mean,
you know?
From somebody who's new to boat, you know, my skiff is the first boat I've ever owned. I mean, just learning how to operate that is a whole other thing, and operate it safely and operate it with these tide swings and the oysters and everything else. It's a whole another learning experience.
It is. And it's very good in that sense to where like it keeps you honest and keeps you new. And like I said, I love trout fishing, but I'd got into a routine effect to where I knew I'd pull up to the river, catch a fish out of the side of this thing, keep moving on. There weren't much else I was chasing, and that owning and operating a skiff, pulling it by yourself, more or less like recently being able to learn how to catch them off the thing while like there's a lot of variables that like go into just giving yourself a baby step. So you get something else to learn.
It's a lot different than just a drift boat with oars.
Exactly. Or just, you know, dropping anchor and working a bobber. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, you know, as you could progress through life, I think certain people want a new challenge, and it's a whole variable. But it's like you talked about, it's so close. And I always honestly worry about people getting hurt. That's like, I can't say it enough, just because like, yeah, just sell him a skiff. He's just going to go out there. He's going to do his thing.
There's a lot to it. I mean, I for example, 2 weeks ago, I think I went down a creek and at low tide and went all the way in with no problem. So on the way out, I'm like, all right. And I was watching the depth on the way in. So I'm like, all right, I can go fast on the way out.
Yeah.
But I got offline and I was a little to the left of the way I came in. And I thankfully ran aground on pluff mud.
Yeah.
So it was a forgiving running around, but I was, moving along pretty good, and engine shut down, and I was like, shit, I hope I didn't break anything expensive. Luckily I didn't.
It's one of those things where you don't know until you go, and you don't learn until it happens to you. And I think even with like the guide community in Charleston, and I just say this from like what I've seen, there's a lot of guys that just jumped right into it. And then they hadn't been out there and done that, or they hadn't been out there. And even in that case of like, money talks, I can kind of walk out there and do whatever. A lot of, you see real quick out here, particularly the ones that can't make it, they end up running away because of that. It's like, it's not an easy area to produce fish, but like keep someone safe in a boat, not eject them over an oyster bed. And like running these creeks to these fish and stuff and getting as far up as we do is not an easy feat. And then, I feel bad for those boys day in, day out. It's not like, you know what I mean? You're
going to be a guide here soon. How much longer before you get where you're out there guiding folks?
I'm taking my time on it. I really want to suck in as much information from like boys that I know. I mean, I've got the availability of going kind of back towards the house, the water that I grew up on, and, bassing trips, but I feel like I'm going to run like just some select stuff as now, like people that I met out west. I was very blessed of having established clientele already. And I've got a good following of people that kind of just already mess with me. And I know they've been ready for me to introduce them to that area, but I'm just taking my time. I don't really want to push it in. I mean, I think I'll start maybe next year just doing some select, like, hey, yeah, come with me for a few hours kind of thing. But I hate to say this, I with all the good guides out here, I really want to be picking shoes on the clientele that I may bring, because I don't need to struggle for the money. I mean, that's one good thing about having a sustainable job, but it's like, I want to be able to show the right angler, the right spots, and it might be someone that I've met. So if I only did 15, 20 trips, my first year, second year doing it, I'd feel fine, because, it's something I generated. But yeah, it's one of those things where I want to ease into it and enjoy every bit of it. I don't want to.
It's a good outlook and way to go about it.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, and I had been fishing for trout as a kid, or between just for fly or spin, whatever, for 15 years before that. And that was one thing with running guided trips that kind of started taking the fun out of it for me. And I didn't want that to get to the point. And then like I said, with family and knowing I needed to be back closer to home, I knew that like, all right, I'm going to start an assault. I want to start on like a fresh plate, but even the friends that I choose to associate with, I wanted to make sure like everything was 110%. And it's good in that sense where it's like, I'm not rushing or feeling, I don't know, like I'm obligated to do something in that, and just, it's a good area to be in. I feel more about like the cast and draft situation. That's the best thing for me with fishing is because it's done so much in my life where it's like, if I can just show this man, hey, how to go and chill out and not be stressed, that's kind of where it goes into.
Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. The main thing we're trying to get across with this podcast is, to get people to see it, who may be struggling and relate to stories that we're having, for people we're having on the podcast, and, to hear how being in the outdoors and things like fishing or, whatever it might be, or hunting or backpacking has helped them get through their hard times, or knows somebody who it's helped. Has fishing done that for you in any way?
Oh yeah. I mean, I tell people all the time, it's fly fishing, it saved my life, numerous times, just being able to have structure. But as a teenager, as I was saying earlier, I was just very rebellious, and it was in a bad time when it came into opioids and stuff, and just seeing all kinds of stuff that was going on. And I had ventured down that road myself. It was good and bad with fishing, because like I'd went to a point where I'd go fishing to do that. Like I'd leave the house and I'd have like a case of beer, weed, and maybe something else I had got, and I'm fishing, quote unquote. And that was like a way to do that. And then once I started like getting away from all that, and I had a friend die, of course, kind of like we talked about, and it really started opening my eyes. Like, man, I just want to get back outdoors. But even doing that after, quote unquote, like sobering up or not trying to go as hard, was hard to find the fun back in it. And even I learned that at an earlier age, where it was like, all right, just the one thing that you can do, whether, you're on death's doorstep, or you can do when you're trying to clear yourself up, or you think you got everything figured out. You're all equal on the water. And that's one thing where it kept me good, so I've relied back on that for a lot, from multiple reasons. But yeah, it's definitely been just a...
Did you ever get to a point where you say you were addicted to that stuff, or
yeah,
like recreational? I guess I don't know. Yeah, there's a fine line between those two things.
It very much so is. And especially when it got into like the harder stuff, I'd started out like in a weekend kind of thing, but then it just got into like that's just what we were doing, and hanging out and just getting as messed up as you could. And school would lag out, and it was just like, all right, I'm kind of out here. And it's funny because, like I said, I'd go get hammered, and then I'd go and try to like sober up a little bit before I came home. Like, I'm just fishing. So, even that, I didn't realize I had a problem until like when they had, like I said, got in trouble and everything was falling down. And my dad was like pressuring me, you're going to get in the military, or you're going to do this. And now I had to stay at home. I was quote unquote, I'd never really been grounded. I'd been grounded, like couldn't do much, but I was grounded at that time. And he was very lenient on me. But yeah, then I realized like, oh, there's a problem.
Was it more of you like the feeling, or was it, I don't think there was mental health stuff behind it, or a combination?
I think it was a combination of both, because I would have to get messed up. I mean, I hate to like go into glory stories, but I like robbed CVS one night for her cough syrup and Chlorocidin, and like I was just like back at the house taking all this weird stuff, and I'm like cross-eyed looking at my dad, and I was just like, what are you doing? And I had money in my pocket, but it was like the fact of like just taking something and then like stealing it or whatever that like was getting that rush off. And I say that in full honesty, where it was like that for me now in fishing, or that was the saving grace. So like at night, if I get any kind of angst or something, I mean, I like to smoke a little weed or whatever, drink beer every now and then. I don't like I like to test myself in that sense, because like I said, when I was staying in Wyoming, I'd sleep in my truck for a month and a half, and I might have had a few bucks to get some beer. Like you might have a little bit, but you learn then where it's like I need to just like clear and get myself out. And
Is that when you started to separate yourself?
Yeah,
and clean up a little
totally.
bit when you moved out west?
Yeah, and that was an escape thing. Like I said, after my buddy had died, I didn't want to be around the small town environment anymore, and I got tired of seeing like like we talked about earlier, same people doing the same stuff.
So you recognize like I got to get out of here.
I got to get out, and I knew that by losing every one of the friends or people that I knew then, and just like disassociating myself, that was going to help out. And then like I had a really good buddy. His name's Alan Gardner. He was like, "You need to get your ass out." And I had worked with like Black Mountain Angler in Asheville, and he knew that I was like, pretty fishy and stuff. He's like, "Dude, they're opening like jobs up there with cowboy drifters in Wyoming. You just need to get up there." And he's like, "It'd do you good to get away from home." And he knew how close I was to my buddy Hunter when he had passed. And it was kind of like one of those things where I was either going to go like, or like I just needed, So
you were teetering.
Yeah,
could have gone either way at that point.
So I use, I wouldn't say like sobriety, but I use fly fishing in my sense as my sane part to realize like when I first started it and where I was, and like how far that even just meeting guys like yourself or Austin or the community that you're in, these are upstanding people that, one of my best friends was, worked in the Coast Guard. He's an established person. So
you're interviewing with a retired federal law enforcement officer.
Exactly. So even that sense where it's like, you can leave all that shit at the door and you guys are still friends and community wide then.
People, man.
Exactly. And like your story's your story. But for me, it's so much deeper than just like, I got into it because I didn't have any hobbies. Like, yeah, I needed hobbies, but like if I didn't get something that was like going to consume me in like all aspects, like, and I say that, because I got into chasing world records for a bit with carp and just even like learning how to do tippet or getting into flies, getting into rod building. I built my own skiff. All these things where it's like, and my wife is a good testament. She'd see me leave to work at 6 o'clock and I wouldn't come home till 11 just because like I had that energy, but in the worst place, it would have went somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, all of that, you still feel like you need those things
daily
to keep you
and it goes back to casting
occupied,
drafts.
I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yep. Yeah. And like we talked about earlier, I mean, casting drafts is a big one. Trout Unlimited was a huge one for me out west where like I had a group to like I could go around. My buddies are huge in that, so they can even see like, man, dude, you've been off a little bit, and it's not necessarily like I'm worried about doing this or doing that, but it's just like
say all of it like it gives you a purpose
all the time.
Yeah.
And like I look at that with an identity because I didn't finish college or anything like that, and I look at it as like you've been fishing your whole life, and there's probably one thing other than that you can do to kind of keep forward on it, and it's vasted it. And I didn't ever want it to become like a negative identity. Social media has a very bad way of people like putting up grip and grins, and they think there's just like for them and fish. And I love showing off what I've done. I mean, don't get me wrong, especially coming from where I've been, and it's a great way to commute with people. But yeah, even that is like
social media is one of those. I tell people like nobody's life is that good.
Never.
It's only the great moments.
It looks really good, and I love to show the highlights of my life. But like even when I moved out here, I got in a really bad wreck. And I wasn't able to go back out west. I thought I was going to be able to like almost total the truck, and I didn't want to bash and share any of that because I was just like, it's not a consuming thing, but it was a big part of my life where it was like, hey, you're here now. So you figure it out. And even that is just like, fishing gives you a bigger purpose, in my opinion, with the guys that you are. It gives you a bigger purpose to where like, hey man, I'll see you in a few weeks at this, or let's go do this here soon. And you get, something to look forward to. And I'm a nerd when they boil down to it. So I love looking at wind and looking at, just like, hey, what might this go in? And so salt really kind of clicks all those.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of things to obsess over as far as trying to figure out the fishery or how to catch fish here.
And once you figure it out, the species change, so like, hey, I'm going to go do redfish here or trout here, and then I might go do tarpon in Cuba. Like, something changes. So then, or you get a destination trip that you might want to do, and that kind of gives you something else to look forward to. Obviously, we only have, if we're lucky, 70 to 80 summers that we'll be able to enjoy here. And,
True.
Most people don't look at it in that sense. You might get 50 of them doing certain said things. So it gives you 50 opportunities to work about, taming down in Mongolia or X, Y, and Z, peacock bass, Golden Dorado, yeah, Bolivia, or going to Argentina. Like one of those factors where it's like, all right, I'm gonna study, I'm gonna learn, and then for 3 or 4 months of your damn life, you are completely consumed with that.
And all of that, everything we just talked about, all of that helps you kind of stay away from all that stuff and leave that other stuff behind.
You really don't have time, and then if you get into sport, especially when it comes into drugs and stuff, you ain't gonna be able to afford it.
So that's another aspect.
It's one of those games where it's like either you're gonna love to do it and you kind of get in, but as I said, I to me, with it becoming my identity, I kind of look at it as like I almost got to do it. Like the day I stopped fishing or fly fishing, I would know I'd get probably 100 calls from people I met along the way that were like, "What are you doing every day?" And like even you get into other hobbies, golfing or something like that. It's like, it's fun, but like it ain't what I want to do. So.
Yeah, and the community is amazing, and I think that again, going back to casting drafts or like volunteering, like I do with Project Healing Waters, and any place that somebody lives, there's organizations like that, or if you're into hiking, you're into hunting, there's always clubs or ways to get involved. I think taking that first step is kind of intimidating to people.
It's huge.
But I think that for me, I would say it's harder and when you do it, you realize it's not as bad as you make it out to be in your head.
And usually the characters you meet along the way can go positive or negative. And that's something we wanted with the Cast and Drafts event, is to kind of open the door from broad spectrum. So it's like, whether you're a woman, you're a man, you're ex-military, there's someone there that's probably going to be able to relate with you, probably going to have like an understanding that you do. And it's every other month, so it's not something that you're like entitled to come to each month. About after a month goes by, you're like, oh man, I can't wait till the next one comes around. So it's good in that sense, but more importantly, it is a great area and space for stupid questions. And that, in fishing or saltwater fly fishing in general, is an underrated aspect, because we usually result to YouTube, and like being able to have a hands-on demo with someone who does not care. They just literally, like we said, you would donate some of their time because they know how much it means to you. And that's how it is for me. I almost feel like I see these younger kids and stuff out there, and I see myself that where I was at. And it's like, man, I wish I could get a hold of one of them just before you just to give them that seed. Like, hey man, you got something. Like once you realize you're not going to be a baseball player or basketball player, or whatever you set out to said be done, and you need something to fall back on, like, it's a good one to have, because it's a lifelong sport.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about obsessing over parts of fishing and this, and when we're talking about what we're interested in doing, I mean, it's like it's replacing almost a bad addiction with a good addiction.
110%. And I've learned even now to how much it's taken out of me. Like I said, I'd spend a full day trying to build a skiff because at that time, that's like the hurdle I want to get over. I've even had to tame that, to not even take it out. Like with trout fishing, for instance, I got to a time where it was like, wake up 4:30, trip, get off 6 o'clock, I'm gonna go scout new water. I get home 3:30, and I hate to say this, but it started to sound like a job. And like that 9 to 5 mentality is good for any human being to have. It's called structure, don't get me wrong, but when you start mixing it into a leisure activity that you actually need, like myself, to survive on, you don't necessarily go out there and fun fish anymore. You're scouting for the next day. And then you're wondering like how I can get this guy who never casted a fly rod on a fish. So you can't even like mentally go fish a harder set of water or like stick yourself in it, because you're not even going to have the time to do that.
Yeah.
And that to me is where the select clientele really comes back into. Like, if I've been working on jacks in the harbor for a few weeks and I got that figured out, and I call you up here and it's like, you're on my roster for a few weeks with jacks, then that's where we're at. And I'm not trying to obviously extort you by being out there on shitty days for jacks. I want a good situation, good timing, show up and get it. And there's no shame in the game for like the guys that have done that, and that's how they make their living, because it's hard. And that's why I never wanted, when I moved here, to fully jump in and be like, yeah, I want to just try to get where you got out of it.
Yeah.
Because even that, you work hard for it, but it goes back to ultimately like, I don't want to steal the wind out of my thing. When I turn the corner on one of these flats, I get excited just as much as anybody else. I don't care if I'm on the bow or the stern of the boat. Like, seeing a fish tail, and I'm trying to keep it just as, you know what I mean?
And I've mentioned this in past podcasts. I mean, when I moved here, I got a charter with Rob Alexander at Beaufort, and that first time on a flood tide, we did it the whole day, and it was a flood tide at the end of the day, and the first time I saw a redfish tailing and casting to it, and I caught a few that day. It was. Yeah, that was
it. Turned it,
man. I was.
It does something else to you, and that to me goes back into the fishery itself. Like we said, we've got a very, very good fishery. It's difficult, keeps you honest, but when everything goes right, it goes right. And
the more I try to figure this out on my own, the more I'm like, man, I should have never bought a boat. I should just get guides.
Yeah, it goes back to that, and you. Like I said, we get back to the addiction phase, or where you're just looking for something else to do. The instant success kind of thing, it's there, but at the same time, it's like,
yeah, but the harder you work at, the longer it takes. When it does start to click and it does start working out, it's that much more satisfying.
Way much more, especially here, because things change every day. Like, it's not like you're going to go back here to this spot this time and do it again. No, sir. No, you might get hurt. So it's like,
well, Langston, I appreciate you coming on. Before we finish up, is there anything you want to add? Anything?
No, I appreciate you having me out. Like I said, it's definitely.
I appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
I think it's important for people. Hopefully, other people will connect and hear it, and they'll take that first step to, finding a passion that will help them, get through whatever they're dealing with.
Definitely.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.